Hello, everyone. I'm Vance Ballard with the National Sports Media Association. Joining me today is longtime sports director at WBAL-TV in Baltimore, voice of the Ravens, and now four-time Maryland Sportscaster of the Year, Gerry Sandusky. Gerry, how are you today?
Vance, great to be with you today. Doing well. Yourself?
Doing just fine. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll start you off with an easy one. When did you know sportscasting was what you wanted to do, was the career path for you?
Really, it wasn't until I got out of college. I was a finance and economics major in college, started interviewing for jobs my senior year, and there were two trends that emerged that I noticed. One, I didn't like any of the jobs, and two, I wasn't offered any of the jobs. And so I had a career counselor who was a friend of my brother's who asked me a powerful question. She said, if you could do anything and you knew you couldn't fail, what job would it be? To which I responded, I'd host the Tonight Show. And she said, well, maybe TV could be a career you should think about. And up to that point, I really hadn't thought about it, but that's the experience that got me thinking along those lines.
Very interesting stuff there. I think that's probably a pretty popular answer. The Tonight Show is not bad work if you can get it.
Especially back in the day.
Yes, correct. I would imagine this was probably Carson times,
Johnny Carson was the king of television. You better
and that's
believe
it
it.
right there. If you could be him, and not many better people. So now, obviously, Jerry, you've been with WBAL and the Ravens for a long time. So journeyman isn't exactly a good way to describe your career per se. But tell me a little bit about how you got where you are today within WBAL and the Ravens.
So I got to BAL 37 years ago by sending a resume tape. I just kind of started my career. I was a weekend sportscaster in Miami, and I found out through the grapevine that they were looking for somebody to do the 11 o'clock sports in Baltimore. And since I was born here, my dad was a coach of the Baltimore Colts back in the 60s and 70s. So I just threw a tape up there and caught their attention. They liked my Baltimore roots. They liked my tape, and it led to a conversation. And eventually, through the interview process, the trial process, I landed that job. And the legendary Vince Bagley was doing the six at the time. He did the six for a couple of years before I moved from just the 11 to the six and the 11. And it was fun because Vince had been here for like 30 years, and now I've been here for 37 years. So, in the last 6+ decades, we've had two sports directors at this station.
Very interesting stuff. You guys have held it down and no need for turnover there. That just speaks testaments again to the quality of your work throughout your tenure.
Thank you.
You hit on it a little bit there, saying your father was a coach. Not only was he a coach, he was a player professionally as well. So football has been in your blood since birth, you could call it. What was it like growing up in and around professional football locker room?
I'm probably the last guy to ask that question because that's all I knew. I didn't realize that everybody didn't grow up that way until I was a freshman in college, and I went to Towson to play basketball. And the first Sunday in September, I remember going to the community bathroom down the hallway in the dorms, and I was looking out the window over the quad, and I saw all these people milling around and playing frisbee and reading and just kind of living their life. And the thought struck me like profoundly, what are they doing? The NFL season started, the games are on. What are you doing? And it was the first time in my life that the thought ever entered my life that everybody's life does not revolve around the NFL. So, I was literally,
Right.
my dad was on the practice field when I was born. I'm the last of five kids. So I've literally been in the world of football from the time I was born, and he coached well into my 30s. So I had already started my broadcasting career. So there's never been a Sunday in the fall in my entire life that football wasn't the axis it revolved around.
So, so what you're saying is you get there, you walk around campus, and you're like, wait, so all these kids, that's true, they don't know Johnny Unitas.
They may have heard of him, but they didn't play
Right.
catch with him like I did as a
Correct.
kid. I mean, Johnny Unitas taught me how to throw a spiral. He taught me the proper, form, thumb down after you throw a ball and things like that. That in hindsight, I look back, it was such a blessing. It was such a cool opportunity to grow up. My brother and I loved Bubba Smith, who was a great defensive end for the Colts. And my dad at the time was his position coach. And so on Saturdays, we would go to the locker room, watch practice, and hang out, help clean up the locker room. We'd hang out at Bubba's locker and talk with him. And it was just a very personal thing. And the one thing I regret that I didn't hold on to is any of the swag from back in the day.
Right.
I had all these. I don't have a Johnny Unitas autographed football. I don't have a Baltimore Colts quarter zip. I don't have any of that stuff because there's a great expression: "Fish discover, water last." The thought never crossed my mind that I wouldn't be around that stuff my whole life.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some pretty cool Dolphin stuff in there from your time down in Miami as well, back
And
when
some
that
Philadelphia Eagles
that
stuff in the
logo
mix as
was
well. And like years later, when I first met my wife, she even asked me, she says, "Is there some reason your entire wardrobe is aqua and orange?" So well, yeah, because it
exactly.
comes out of the equipment room at the Dolphins.
Exactly. Now, speaking of being around that, so it's been obviously your entire life. You don't really know anything else. Did you have any sort of relationship with the broadcasters that you were around growing up? I know that you said it was later when you realized that's what you wanted to be, but did you think back and go, those are some things I can take from the people I grew up around?
So the first broadcasters that the first one it was Chuck Thompson, the great voice of the Baltimore Colts. Growing up in the '60s and '70s, he was the soundtrack of the fall when I was a kid, and that was spectacular. And then the first big time TV broadcasters I was around was when my dad was an assistant in Philadelphia. And I'd gone to a Saturday practice with him at Veterans Stadium. It was preseason. And they wanted to tape a segment with him for the upcoming preseason game. And it was Pat Summerall and Tom Brookshire were the broadcasters. And so we went upstairs to the broadcast booth and I was watching them do the interview with my dad. And, I knew Pat Summerall was and Tom
Right.
Brookshire. They were national figures. And, all the bright lights are on. You're in the TV booth. And I remember being like kind of wild, as thinking like, this is a special place.
Right. You kind of just feel the aura of the room, and especially the names you mentioned, Pat Summerall just being in there, that brings its own separate energy as a whole. So
Pretty
now,
spectacular moment. And again, those things that not so years later you look back and you realize how fortunate I was to be exposed to those things. I mean, that's something most people never get a chance to do. And then many years later when I was an intern in Miami, I remember going to the Orange Bowl the night after Dick Enberg had done the Orange Bowl broadcast, I think with Merlin Olsen. And they had a couple of their notes were still laying around in the old Orange Bowl broadcast booth. And so, I started studying those things up and there's an expression that success leaves clues, and it's true. And as you pick up a couple of those clues along the way, it's pretty powerful.
right, that's like finding gold right there, especially in the old Orange Bowl too. That's X marks the spot pretty much.
Yeah, pretty magnificent experiences.
Exactly. And now you touched a little bit in your answer and talking there, you touched on this, but you were no slouch when it came to athletics in your younger days, playing two sports in college, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I played
At
basketball for a year and football for 2 years at Towson, but don't get wowed by it. My career statistics are 2 rebounds and a foul. I pretty much redefined mediocre, but I was able to play at a high level. I was able to be on teams at a high level. I didn't play very often. In basketball, I sat so far down at the bench they called it the suburbs. But you still, you had to earn your spot on the team as a walk-on, and it's a great experience. You learn a lot about different people and different walks of life and how guys see things, and it was a pretty powerful experience. And then I played football for a couple of years until I had a career-ending injury. And as a broadcaster, that's been very helpful because it's one thing to talk about a game you're seeing. It's another thing to have seen the game through a face mask and to understand what it's like to run 40 yards down the field, look over your shoulder through the face mask, track the ball with somebody draped on your shoulder and try to make a play. You tend to be a little less critical when you've seen the sport from not only the 50-yard line, but also through a face mask.
Right, exactly. And that touches on exactly what I was going to say. Is there anything you can take from being a player that you bring into the booth with you? And that sounds exactly like that's what that is. They're just kind of the experience, the different point of view from someone like me, who, if I'm in the booth, I've never played past the high school state championship game. So my criticisms aren't as valued as yours would be having high level experience.
Whether they're valued or not is really how you deliver it as a broadcaster, but whether you appreciate it as a human, I think is where I'm coming from because, even at the highest level, the greatest athletes in the world, they're still human beings. They still have lungs that burn when they get fatigued. They still are writhing in pain when they get injured. They still struggle to play through pain. They still have families they have to worry about. They still have all the human experience that everybody watching a game has, but they face the pressure of being in the spotlight when the season's on the line. An example, I'll tell you, after I suffered a career-ending injury, I was home that year, and the Dolphins were in the playoff game. It was the '82 divisional playoff game, the Dolphins and the Chargers. The one Kellen Winslow became famous because he dragged off the field, draped over his teammates,
Mhm.
and Rolf Benerschke and Uwe von Schaum, the kickers for the Chargers, and the Dolphins were going back and forth on misses until one of them, in this case, Benerschke, hit the game when he kicked. But what I remembered is in overtime, I was taking the water out to the huddle. And I got to the huddle and I realized, man, this is not a Disney movie. These guys were bent over, sucking for air, dying, gasping, trying to just get through the next play. And it always imprinted on me that this stuff, it's not a Disney movie. This is not a script. This isn't Hollywood. These are human beings fighting through adversity, trying to achieve something important.
Right. And that's a really cool perspective to have in an interesting way that I think people are often hesitant to take into account when whether they're watching, listening, whatever it may be, to the actual game itself. So it's cool to hear that you can have that view and perspective when you're in the booth doing your job as well on Sundays.
It's something that I try to always hold on to because it's really easy to fall for the trap of those are names and numbers and uniforms and salaries. But at the end of the day, they're still human beings.
Right.
And they want all the same things other human beings want, and they want to succeed. And to get to that level, it's the other thing playing helps you realize. I played Division I basketball and Division II football. And like I said, I was a backup. So I know what it's like to hit that glass ceiling.
Mhm.
And these are guys who've all been the top 1% of the top 1% their entire life, all the way through. They were the best kids you've ever seen in Little League, the best player you ever went against in high school. They were all world, they were all American in college, and now they're in the NFL. And once you get to that level of the NFL, it all gets equalized. They're all phenomenal. They've been phenomenal their whole lives. So what's the X factor that's going to put me ahead of you, you ahead of me? And that's what plays out. And it's a human storyline, and that's where the drama comes from.
Right. Awesome. That's really cool to hear. Touching a little bit there on the storyline drama type deal. You are also a published author. Forgotten Sundays, A Son's Story of Love, Loss, and Life from the Sidelines of the NFL is the title of Gerry's book, and the newest addition to the top of my reading list, just for the record. Has writing a book always been something you wanted to do, or and what did you
Yeah,
take
I,
away
I
from that
love to write. I've been a
experience?
writer, since I was in college. I love to write. I love to. It's something that's very important to me. It's something I enjoy a great deal. And then the motivation of the book, the meaning of the title is my dad. Obviously, his whole life revolved around the NFL. He played in the '50s for the Browns. He coached for 5 decades in the NFL. His whole life was built around Sundays. And at the end of his life, he suffered Alzheimer's at the end of his life and forgot it all.
Right.
Hence Forgotten Sundays. And there was just so much that he did and I experienced through him that I didn't want it to be lost. And that's kind of why I captured it in the book.
And so it sounds like that was something you were able to take away from that experience is kind of getting closer to your father and his experiences, and then kind of encapsulating all of those so that they wouldn't go into go away.
Correct. And like you said, I mean, I'm 63 now, and I remember my dad when he was my age. So when I was beginning my career, he was about 60, so I really got to, I got to cover the Dolphins when he was working with the Dolphins. I really got to know him in his professional life, which is something most sons never get the chance to do with their fathers. And that really gave me a powerful insight into his life as well as an appreciation for his life. And that's kind of where the book germinated from.
And that's again, that's just another really cool part of your life story that you were involved in, and again, something I'm super excited to sit down and read. I believe the Amazon guy says it'll be here either today or tomorrow, so I'm very
I hope you
excited to
enjoy
get
it.
that and crack the thumb through the pages. Now, Jerry, in your time with the Ravens, there's not much you haven't seen, and in terms of success, failures, whatever it may be. And I could sit here until the hay is in the barn, listening to you talk
Well
about
played.
them and your times and your stories. But is there one call, game, or moment maybe that people wouldn't immediately think of when they think Baltimore Ravens football that you can draw back to that's special to you?
People ask me all the time what's my favorite call, and the one that everybody kind of remembers is the Mile High Miracle when Joe Flacco on fourth and forever hits Jacoby Jones, and they forget that didn't win the game. That sent the game to overtime.
Right,
Justin Tucker won the game in overtime with a field goal. The lights going out in the Super Bowl. I actually don't have one call that I think about all that much. A lot of times people will say, "Oh, do you remember this call or that call?" I really don't because you're so dialed into the play, whatever play it is, whether it's preseason, regular season, week two, Super Bowl. You're so on the tip of the ball that there's not really that much time to reflect or that was great or that was fun. For me, the most enjoyable play to call is the play I'm calling.
right,
It's not one that happened 10 years ago or 12 weeks ago or next month or next week. It's literally this play. That's the thing I probably enjoy most about play by play is your mind can't be anywhere else. You can't be 5 years ago. You can't be 2 weeks from now. You can't be 10 minutes ago. You've got to be right now in the moment because you're narrating history as it unfolds in unpredictable ways. And so I don't really have a favorite call. I just love the call that I'm in, if that makes sense.
yes, exactly. And so it sounds almost like you're saying you don't feel like you have time to sit back and think, man, that was a really good call. Let me log this one so I can remember that. As
Not at
opposed,
all.
whereas you're thinking, all right, what's next? Let's see, what's Lamar going to do on this play? What's
Correct.
that type of thing, and just enjoying the moment that you're in as you're there.
And look, Lamar's a perfect example. If you think you know where the ball's going with Lamar, you'll get lost. And I have. I had to actually change the way I call games because he's got such good ball skills. Before Lamar, you could kind of tell where the quarterback was going with the ball. Even on a play fake, you could tell like it's a fake. You can see a play fake coming from a mile away. Well, not with Lamar.
Right.
Frequently with Lamar, he hands it to Derrick Henry, and then like 3 steps later, you realize nope, he didn't hand it to Henry. He's got the ball. So I've learned to stay like a heartbeat behind the ball. I used to be out front of the ball. Now I'm a little bit behind the ball because if you get in front of the ball with Lamar, you'll get lost every time.
And that's interesting to hear too. So, and Lamar came in pretty long into your career, so it's almost like you had to adjust your whole style of work and the things you have learned up until that point, not early on in your career, which is another obstacle for you to overcome.
Actually, I think it's an opportunity to grow into. Lamar is a revolutionary player. He changed the way defensive coordinators built game plans. He changed the way edge rushers attack the quarterback. He changed the way defensive backs have to cover receivers because he plays the game like nobody else played it before. And you can either be stuck in your ways and let the new way pass you by, or you can evolve, whether you're a broadcaster, a coach, or a player, and you evolve with the game.
Right. Right. And that makes sense. And just again, speaks testaments to why you're so successful in your career and why you're receiving now your fourth Sportscaster of the Year award. And Jerry, this has been amazing. And as we wrap things up, I'll end this with a two-parter here. One, after so many years, what keeps you from being burnt out for so many years in the same place, doing the same? I don't want to say doing the same thing over and over because obviously each Sunday is different, but the weekly routine, I guess, is kind of similar for a long time. And two, what advice that maybe you were given or that you've learned along the way could you give to students or young professionals like myself who are looking to make their way into the sports casting or sports journalism industry?
So I'll start with the tip, something Chuck Thompson told me when I was first starting my career. We were in the broadcast booth. He was doing the Orioles games at the time.
Mhm.
And I asked him a similar question. And he said, if you don't bring the work with you to the booth, you'll never find what you're looking for once you're here. Which meant, what for me, the work is Monday through Saturday. And if you do the work Monday through Saturday, you'll be able to do your best on Sunday. And the first part of your question, what keeps me going is the unexpected nature of it all. So there's two things that I don't do. I don't ever make predictions. And I don't ever answer anybody's question of, hey, what do you expect to happen this week? And people usually think I'm putting them off or I'm just kind of brushing them off. I'm not. I literally don't think about it.
Right.
And the reason for that is I don't ever want to fall for the trap of broadcasting the game I'm expecting instead of the game I'm actually seeing. It's so easy to fall into the trap of expectations. Well, I think they're
Mhm.
going to run the ball a whole lot and they'll have a big lead and then they'll salt it away. Well, you know what? That's not how the game shook out. And if you are willing to just show up without expectations and just call the game that unfolds, it will take you in remarkable places because the story is always more interesting than you could have ever thought of your own. And it
Mhm.
always turns and twists around variables that nobody would have imagined, whether those are positive or negative, whether it's a field goal off the upright, whether it's a dropped pass, whether it's an unbelievable catch, a pick six, a linebacker intercepting the ball and trapping it in his legs, things that nobody would ever predict on a Wednesday. So why get hung up on that stuff midweek? Just do your homework, learn the names, learn the numbers, learn the storylines, learn the personalities, learn the stakes, and then tell that story as it unfolds on Sunday. And because it always unfolds in unexpected ways, every Sunday's still fresh for me.
That very cool. That's a very cool perspective to have, and it just like say it really opens up the way to go into something that you've been doing for three plus close to 4 decades now. And like you say, each week is a new fresh experience. And I know expecting the unexpected is a whole lot easier when Lamar Jackson is the guy you're talking about.
You got that right.
Well, Gerry, I want to thank you again so much for taking the time to join me today and offer another congratulations on your much deserved award. Best of luck to you in all you do.
Vance, I
And
appreciate
ladies,
it. Great visiting with you, buddy.
absolutely. Thank you, ladies again, and gentlemen, once again, football lifer, two-time Emmy Award winner, WBAL sports director, golden voice of the Baltimore Ravens, and now four times Maryland Sportscaster of the Year, Gerry Sandusky.